Praveen, thanks for joining. Appreciate it. For the folks that are listening, watching, and you tell them about introduce yourself, tell them about you, and let's start there.
Sure. Thank you, Jamie. Thanks for having me here. I'm excited to have this conversation today. I'm Praveen Kamsetti. I'm based in Austin, Texas. I've been in the industry for 2+ decades in various leadership roles in a very diverse industry. I work for a financial industry, pharmaceutical industry, technology side of it, and manufacturing. And today, I'm a vice president for one of the company called Jupiter Capital Management. I'm also board of advisors for a couple of startup companies. And recently, I wrote a book. It's called The 12 Framework for Modern Leadership. I just released a couple of weeks ago. We had a big book launch event happened in Austin, Texas on February 7th with industry leaders and my family and some of my friends. Almost 200 plus people came there. So I was super excited, and it's exciting time for me. And I heard a very good positive feedback from all over the place. So I truly appreciate that support everybody's giving it.
Which fantastic. So congratulations. So tell us more about the book. What was what's the focus? What's it like? What do you want to accomplish with it?
Yeah, so I've been, like I said, it's a 2+ decades of my career. A lot of times, I'm very lucky that I worked for some of the finest leaders during my very early stages of career, which helped me to, understand and kind of get a curiosity and growth mindset. How does, leadership work, right? And then I learned so much from them, to get inspiration from them. Last decade or so, I started practicing. It's called 4L framework, which is lead with empathy, lead for business results, lead by example, and lead with emotional intelligence. That's the framework I've been practicing. So in 2024 December, I thought, why don't I give these to the release to the world, right? Share some insights on it. And that's when I started writing a book. It took one year for me. And the book is all about how do we make leadership more human? How do we make leadership more human while still delivering the business results?
Interesting.
How do we make leadership more human while still incredibly effective in the business? How do we make leadership more human while driving the innovation for growth, driving the operational efficiency for the cost, and managing the business risks? That's about my book. It's more about how do we balance people and profits? How do we balance people and business performance? And how do we balance relations and results? It's more of that. So that's the whole idea. And how do we leverage those 4Ls framework, which I mentioned earlier, to get some of the, complex business problems solved?
No. So it sounds great. Sounds really interesting. So let me dive right into something and sort of, I challenge you. You're the expert. There are a lot of sort of, I say, leadership models, approaches to leadership, a lot of folks that are working at different levels. Okay. And I get that. And I think what you're describing sounds valuable in all cases. I want to talk about specifically how that would apply in I say startup environment, because I really want to focus there as much as possible. And in particular, how do you find the balance between we must grow, we must survive, we must grow, there is pressure everywhere, it's chaos as we're trying to figure this out and the founder initially is just the founder, right? They have ideas and they start something with now, how do they take that and lean into it and lean into the model, the 4L model, and kind of, apply that in that context?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? So if you look at in today's AI era, right, the disruption what we see today, the disruption it's maybe due to technological innovations like artificial intelligence. We have seen that, right? Digital twin and quantum computing, or it can be geopolitical situations, or it can be environmental, or it can be combination of those three or those two.
Yeah.
But world has realized that we are going through a disruption, and we realize that it's going to be constant. It's not a one-time shot. We're going to be in this constant choppy waters going forward. So what I think is leadership at this moment is more about not just command and control. It's more about influencing. The leader has to be influencer. Leader has to be a networker. Leader has to be a navigator to navigate from these choppy waters. In an AI environment today, a leader has to create or develop a psychological safety environment, which is more important today in AI environment than ever before. And the reason is your teams or your organization has to feel empowered so that they can challenge the assumptions, they can come with unconventional ideas for that triggers the innovation. When there is a lot of anxiety, as you see with the AI or with the mergers and acquisitions, people look up to the leader to help them navigate, right? That's when the leader's integrity and consistency come into the picture. And that's what my one of the L's is lead by example.
But so I follow you. I agree. So let's do this. I agree completely. Now, how does a leader that's dealing with their own level of chaos, right? Like they're trying to talked about feeling psychologically safe. I guess the challenge is how can a leader who doesn't feel safe or psychologically safe themselves because of everything else that's around them, how do they then act? Are they just blocking it and then what they send down to their team is a little bit different? Or would you suggest that they be transparent about what's going on and so that the team is engaged and it's like what's the approach you would take in that case?
It's both, right? None of them is not a perfect example, but both. If you look at the mergers and acquisition example I gave you, you can be as much transparent as you can, but there are certain areas you cannot disclose everything.
Right.
So that's where I think the fourth L I mentioned is lead with emotional intelligence. So that where leaders must practice emotional intelligence so that they can manage their emotions, others' emotions, at the same time continuously build the relations with your teams, with your peers, with your stakeholders, and more importantly, with your business customers. So that's why I say emotional intelligence. If you look at my 4L framework, we have empathy, and at the end we have emotional intelligence. So that's a perfect classic example what you asked me about it. How do we manage? So that's the key. And one of the questions people ask me about, empathy will become a soft leader. How do you get the business results in today's world, right? So today's world, revenue is important to sustain your business growth, to reach your mission and vision of your company. That's where my second L I mentioned as lead for business results. How do we do that? That is, when you lead with empathy, make sure you have accountability associated with it. So lead with empathy, make sure accountability so that people are accountable for their outcomes and their business outcomes. That's where you lead for the business results. So empathy for me is not a soft skill, it's more critical skill. And that's the accountability plus empathy will give a fantastic results, especially for bigger goals, to achieve bigger goals and long-term results.
So let's talk a little bit about that because we talk about business results, right? Leading for business results, and then empathy. Sometimes I don't want to say the two are in conflict, but the two can feel like they're in conflict at times, right? So the two are doing that when there's an incredible amount of pressure that's heaped on you. Are there things that leaders can do or should do that will I guess the question is, yeah, sure, they want to empower their teams and yes, they want to push them forward in terms of giving them as much accountability, creating accountability, but also letting them do their thing. How do you find the balance between the stick and carrot or push and pull? Like I'm really trying to understand that because I was there myself. I was a founder multiple times. There's an incredible amount of pressure to grow. Stuff is moving unbelievably fast. And while you want to always get help the team get there, sometimes there's some real pushing that is required, whether you want it to do it that way or not, or at least that's was my experience.
No, I agree. Like I said, the empathy is not about this being a soft. Empathy is not about being a soft. Empathy is not about not letting people go, not laying off people. It's not about that. It's about understanding others, understanding your teams, understanding your customer, understanding your stakeholder, and at the same time, making sure that you help them support their growth. If you talk about teams, for example, not just understanding their needs, that's not empathy. Understanding and help them grow for their success and
Right.
becoming more of a multiplier, leader as a multiplier rather than a diminisher. So that's what it means. Like, if you add the accountability with empathy, that's where the whole mechanism changes, right? It's not become a soft anymore. It's more of a understanding and influencing and getting the results out of them.
So,
Now, one example I'll give you. I think
yeah.
this is a perfect example because I have a good mergers and acquisition experience. So when you're in a mergers and acquisition, when company announces they're acquiring or merging with another company, as you know, the C-suite leaders more focused on business, more focused on financial, legal point of view, right? Business model. But 90% or even more of the organization going through, am I going to have my job? Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to be do I need to report? What is going to be my corporate culture? Am I going to lose my flexibility and whatnot? So that's when you have that situation as a leader, you need to understand that's where empathy comes in. But if you don't address that, then you lose the institutional knowledge, right? The people who are high performers, people who have your institutional knowledge, they are the first one to leave if you don't address that psychological safety issue. And that's where I'm talking about empathy, understanding them, making sure that you can help them to grow and get success. Necessarily, empathy does not mean you're not going to let them go. At the end of the day, it's the business results.
So, okay. So, let's talk a little bit about as you were thinking about the book, you've applied your years of experience, obviously, in a variety of different businesses to the way that's thinking. What I'd love for you to do is, I'd love for you, are there some specific stories without sharing, you don't have to share details of everything, but where you found yourself or you've seen others in particularly challenging places around the need to deliver significant business results, but there were either they had their limitations, it was a leadership, whatever that is, and what they did to overcome it, or they didn't make it because they couldn't get there.
I think it's always right. A leader's success and failure may not be a end for anybody in one organization. So one organization you may be failure, but if you continue to stick to the leadership principles, you will get a tremendous results in other organizations. So it's the leader's success depends on sometimes business side also, right? So what business model is required, what kind of business is going through. But in my book, I mentioned about several different scenarios. Like you asked about how does this work, right? These principles, I mentioned about 18 different topics. It can be mergers and acquisition in cybersecurity. How do we do? How do we see this through the 4L framework? How do we protect? How do we strategize AI for the enterprises using this 4L framework? Even in healthcare industry, for example, digital twins, AI are a big shift in an enterprise. The in healthcare industry, how do we see the 4L? 4L will work. How do we the flow 4L framework will help to amplify that experience, right? The personalized experience for the customer. So several 18 different business insights in different industries I mentioned about it. But for your question, what are the failures? What are the success? I have seen both. I've seen people successing. But what I can tell you is leaders who are more of influencers, like I said, are networkers. Those are got a long-term success compared to people who are command and control, which is the short-term success.
Sure. Right, right. Makes sense. Can we talk about the difference between as you think about the model and you think about leaders and how they drive things, how much of where they're coming from it? And again, I think there's a difference when you're a very, very large organization, you're leading from above, and I get that. When you're actually there and you're in the middle of it and you're hands on, how much of the importance with the leader is the having the strategy and the approach and the communication align versus the execution, digging in. You talked about leading by example. So even in that context, like where do you see one end and the next one begin?
In a bigger organizations, if you are talking about 40,000, 30,000 employees, which I work for, and you are a leader, if you want to lead that big of organization, you need to have an influence you rather than just commanding, right? That we talked about it.
Of course,
But
yeah.
If you're talking about startup, for example, when you are startup, right, one of the question you asked, how do we scale startups, for example? What are the reasons for the failure of the startups, right?
Yeah.
So if you are a founder of a startup and very early stages of it, you will be managing the work. Like you said, hands-on, right? Lead by example, you do that, right? You're more of a building the product, right? But when you are in a stage when you're scaling, you have to transition that from product developing a product to managing the system, managing the whole product line. In a simple analogy, when you are developing a product or when you're early stages of your startup, it's more of a family culture. You just manage them as a family. But when you are going into the scaling, right, growing more, then you need to transition to the leadership more in such a way that how you manage your sports teams, for example. When you were talking about sports teams, everybody has a clear roles are defined. There is a measurement of performance for each role you have to measure, and you need to bring players at a different stages.
Mhm.
For example, leadership. If you need to bring a leader who has an experience for growing your business. So that is a transition. That's perfect what you said about it. When you are in a startup mode, you're more of a hands-on work, hands-on leader. But when you are growing, when you're scaling, you become more of a leadership, which is delegating more and influencing more. That's how you scale.
Right. And in terms of sharing the information, sharing the knowledge that you have and letting go, is that something that you've seen that is hard for leaders or something that they're better at doing, especially in startups?
Which stages of startup you are in, right? If you are in a very early stages startups, you don't want to share every single thing because that's more of a proprietary knowledge,
Right.
proprietary data. But if you are at a stage where your growth, you are in a scaling phase and you are grown in 2 to 3 times of your workforce, then you need to be more of onboarding the culture rather than just managing all by yourself. Because the culture gets diluted when the agility, the speed, and the accountability when you are in a very early stages of startup will be very different when you're growing very different. So yes, you need to delegate it. You may have to share certain things, certain business insights with your leaders, with your team to get the success. That's where I call it as a multiplier. If you don't share those, if you don't delegate those, then you will become a diminisher, right? Your team will not be of any use. So you got to multiply, right? Everybody has to have, perform to their potential. Otherwise they will.
No, that's great. Great, and I actually think that's an excellent point for us to, like, emphasize and kinda, like, end on. Let me do this. What would you can you do me a favor and so you have your book, like, where can people find you? How can they get to you? I'll put some links in the description after, but
Yeah.
why don't you share for folks? Yeah.
Yeah, so we released the book in early January. It's available all over the world in United States and in Canada, Amazon, and we have it in Barnes and Noble as well.
Okay, so that's on Amazon. And is there anywhere else, anybody reaching out to you, or where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. The people can reach out to me in my LinkedIn. I'm available in the LinkedIn, so if there anybody wants, then definitely reach out to me.
All right. Well, thank you for Praveen. I appreciate the time. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.